For thousands of years, human beings have willingly engaged in feats of strength and competition. The Olympics date back over 3,000 years, and history shows us examples of running races and shot put and javelin throwing and equestrian events. And these feats of strength have become more common as ordinary people willingly put themselves through torture for the sake of the game. And I'm not sure if our modern day races would seem logical to the ancients. After all, the Krispy Kreme 5K, where participants run 1.6 miles, eat a dozen Krispy Kremes, and then run 1.5 miles back without vomiting, seems to be a little less in line with the original intention of the Olympics. But endurance tests are everywhere. The 15K Tough Mudder brags about having to climb a 30-foot obstacle wall and then slosh down on the other side through an electrified mud pit. And the popular television show American Ninja Warrior draws participants and viewers from all over the globe, eagerly watching to see whether the competitors can make it through the obstacle course to reach the finish line. And while I have no intention of participating in the zombie run, which is a race where people are paid to dress up like zombies and chase you through the course, I do feel like most days of my life, I'm participating in some kind of test of endurance. And I think Job felt the same way. The book of Job is a standalone text, and scholars are unsure of its authorship or dating. And in some Bibles, it's placed before the Psalms, and in some Bibles, it's placed later on in the Bible. And the opening words of the book of Job tell us that Job was from the land of Uz, which to me sounds like the Wizard of Oz. But really, it's just like a little small town outside the land of Israel. Job was not a Jewish man, but he worshiped the God of the Israelites. And though Uz and sort of its location in Edom are places that are just so far away and beyond our capacity to understand, the story of this simple man in this small town is the story of all of us. A man who had to endure challenge after challenge after challenge after challenge. In chapter 1 alone, Job's property is destroyed by fire, his livestock are taken away, and his children die when the house they are in collapses under a windstorm. You could say it was just a season, as we often do, but chapter 2 tells us that he is afflicted from head to toe with boils, from the tip of his head to the tip of his toes, and his wife turns on him. Chapter after chapter, these obstacles continue and the challenges mount, and just like the crowds that gather to watch these modern day races and feats of strength and endurance, God watches to see how Job responds to the difficulties in his life. And we can spend our time angry at God for just watching all these things happen to Job, and many people do. They do just that. They get mad at God for the horrible things that have happened. But we can learn a lot from Job about what it looks like to endure through challenging times. And you see, when I think back over my tenure here with you, which has really just been short 2.5 years, and I think about all we have endured together as a church and all you have navigated as people who have had obstacle after obstacle placed in front of you. And quite frankly, I worry. I worry that there will be calluses that will have built up after our overexposure to grief and to fear and to difficulty. And I worry that these calluses, these hardened places, will create too thick of a barrier between the difficulties of life and the ability to see and access joy. And as a part of my very, very serious sermon research, I asked my hairdresser this week, do you think we will ever be happy again? And she said without hesitation, no. She said, the world has changed so dramatically in how we treat each other, in the ways we are quick to injure each other, and in the trials that we endure. She said that the pain that we're carrying feels like it cannot be overcome. And Job says it like this: sighing has become my daily food. And he asks God, why would you give life to someone and then trap them in such misery and pain? But over and over again throughout our sacred text, we are promised the exact opposite of despair. We are promised joy, listed as one of the fruits of the Spirit and one of the manifestations of God in us. We are offered a life where mourning turns to dancing and our gloom becomes bright like the noonday. And these aren't just things of the past. They are gifts that are available to us today and every day, and we just have to learn how to find them again. Pastor Mark Yelkanali tells a story of a day when he and his family were standing out in a field. They live out west, and they looked over to the horizon, and they noticed that both families, the two little girls of the both families, were being placed on horses by a random woman they did not know. And so they ran over to ask what was happening, and the woman shared with them that she has made it her life mission to take horses that are locked up all day in small areas, confinements, that get their food from feeding troughs and in water bins, and they only come out for appointments or lessons or scheduled events. But most of their life, they're trapped in their stalls. And she felt so bad for these horses that she met with the owners of the stables, and she offered to take the horses away for weeks of camp. And so she places a camper in the middle of a field, and she takes the horses with her, 2 or 3 at a time. And for 1 week's time, the horses, in the beginning of the week, they stay right by her camper. And they are crying and whining for oats and for water. And over the course of the week, she slowly leads them all the way through the countryside and invites them to once again drink from the streams that flow from the mountains, and once again to eat the grasses that are all around them. But the horses, who have been penned up in these stalls for far too long, have forgotten how to find joy in the simple gifts that are right around them. And so Mark asked this random horsewoman, he said, well, what happens? What's it like for them when they finally get a taste of this fresh water and they eat this fresh grass again? And she said, it is absolute pure joy when it clicks for them that they do not have to live a caged life. They take off and they gallop and they play. And if that isn't a modern day parable for our own lives, I don't know what is. And initially, those horses are filled with despair when they lose their cage. They fixate on the past, and they long for the days where they had a routine of being fed on a schedule. And Yaconelli says that the shock of joy is when you realize that beneath the suffering lies fields of freedom and life. This is really the Jesus way, right? Suffering is what opens the door to something better. But what I think is hardest is that it's not formulaic. We have been taught that discipline and planning and hard work will yield a life that conforms to our expectations. Our society does not tolerate the idea that we lack control. And yet, is there anything more destructive than human beings who think that they are in control of the world, who think and live as though they know more than God? And when we believe that we have our life under control, we also believe that we earned every fortune all by ourselves, and that we deserve the suffering we receive. But Job shows us otherwise. Job shows us an upright and godly human who refused to turn away from his faith even when he could no longer hear the voice of God. And when he was most troubled and in most despair, when he faced the most challenges, he believed that God would give him the strength to get him through. And this book, it's so hard to read because Job suffers so much. It's as if someone sort of fell during the marathon and the medic is just watching. And maybe that's how it feels in your life. That through these seasons of difficulty, no one's come to your rescue. But what is true about all of this is that God is watching the whole way through the book of Job. And he believes in Job. And he believes in Job maybe more than Job believes in himself. And I kind of see it as if God is in the box, seeing the horror that is happening, and every time Job makes it to another obstacle, God leans in like a parent at a Little League game. Or Eagles coach Nick Sirianni last night, silently whispering, "You got this. You got this. You're going to be okay." But just like in a Little League game, The parents aren't supposed to run into the game and hit the ball for the children. No, they are supposed to be hands-off, hoping and praying and watching from afar. And somehow, knowing that the God of the universe sees more in us, more strength in us than maybe we see in ourselves. I don't know, but somehow it makes it easier to keep going. Somehow knowing that God is rooting for us and believes we can make it through even when we don't think we can, gives me hope to keep believing that the joy can once again be found. C.S. Lewis says that joy is the characteristic of a person who has felt it once and will always want it again. He says that joy is something that gets under your ribs and tickles down your back, and it makes you so happy that you forget meals. And joy is the memory of green pastures and freedom and abundance, and we have all felt it once. It lives in us, despite the melancholy response that happiness will elude us as a people forevermore. The psalmist says in chapter 55, verse 21, that there will always be people around us with war in their hearts. But if we cast our cares upon the Lord, he will rescue us. What's sometimes hard to remember is that Jesus never offered a 5-step plan out of suffering. He didn't. He told stories, and he sat with people, and he listened. And I think that what's been hardest for me in this COVID season is that when it all started, I naturally, as I am who I am, saw it as a grand opportunity. And I said, I'll create a new exercise routine, and I will organize my basement, and I will reorient my life and my priorities, and I will work less, and I'll create a plan for my future. I'll learn to use my time wisely. But what I received was not a more organized or productive life. What I have received is the ability to see the pain of others and how it shows itself in unique and unpredictable ways. What I have received is the ability to know that common suffering has the power to harden us, to build up calluses in our hearts, or it has the power to open us to empathy and understanding. The scriptures tell us to be still and know, not to be still and know why. And in this endurance test, we will remember our days of joy. One person said to me on the steps of a Chinese restaurant not too long ago, I used to be an optimist. And I said, me too. We do not know how long Job suffered. The years are not mentioned, and we do not know why Job suffered. But he maintained his faithfulness the entire way. And we do know that of all he lost, the thing that he feared most was losing his relationship with God. And after 40 chapters of agony, God is faithful to Job and restores it all: his family and his life and his job and his land. But what strikes me is that in every race I've ever participated in or watched, whether it's the Broad Street Run or the New York City Marathon or our former church's Palm Sunday Run, which was called Run for Christ's sake, is that the streets on all these races are filled with people on the sidelines cheering each other on, propelling each other forward, wanting the absolute best for them. Strangers and friends alike believing that they will find their way to the joy of the finish line. And so now, as we, the people of God, have a chance to turn our mourning into dancing, no matter how long it takes, I want to ask you, can we take the posture of God and look upon each other and say, you got this? And can we look into our own hearts and trust that God is with us and say, I got this? Nobody stands in the cheering section and wishes the worst upon the runners and criticizes them when they fall. So now, in this very moment, I invite you to turn to another person without knowing what struggle they are enduring, what joy they have lost, and with the confidence of the God of Job, look another person in the eye and say 3 times, you've got this, you've got this, you've got this. Go ahead. Amen.